I have read the Bible cover to cover, 3 times, and the third time, something broke open in me that I can never close again. Because I wasn't reading it as a believer. I wasn't reading it as a critic. I was reading it as someone who had just spent months deep inside Gnostic texts, ancient writings that the early church didn't just reject, they hunted down and burned. And when I came back to the Bible with that knowledge living inside me, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The same pattern, over and over, in verse after verse. Not a pattern of love, not a pattern of liberation, a pattern of management, of containment, of a population being carefully, systematically, spiritually administered by something that needed them obedient, divided, and permanently dependent. And the ancient Gnostics, mystics who were hunted and silenced for what they knew, had a very specific name for that something. They called them the Archons. You have been told your entire life that the Bible is the Word of God. But I need you to ask yourself one question that will either change everything or confirm what part of you already suspects. What kind of God needs you to never question, never unify, never access the divine directly, and punishes every generation of your bloodline when you do? That is not the fingerprint of a creator who loves you. That is the fingerprint of a control manual. And that is exactly what I am going to show you. Open this book, read 10 specific verses out loud, and let the pattern speak for itself. Because Genesis, Exodus, Romans, Revelation, they don't need my interpretation once you see what is actually written inside them. There existed a group of early mystics, the Gnostics, who looked at the same scriptures everyone else was reading and arrived at a conclusion so threatening to established religious power that their texts were declared heretical and burned. The ones that survived, discovered in Nag Hammadi in 1945, confirmed what these mystics had whispered in secret for centuries. This world was not created by the supreme loving source of all existence. It was created by a deceiver, a lesser, arrogant, deeply insecure cosmic architect who had never seen anything higher than himself, and therefore declared himself God. The Gnostic text Apocalypse of Adam, a document so old it may predate Christianity itself, describes a secret knowledge passed from Adam to his son Seth, a knowledge about the true nature of this world's rulers, that they were not divine, that they were administrators of a constructed reality designed to keep human souls permanently asleep to their own power. His name was Yaldabaoth, the false creator, and the beings he appointed to manage humanity, on the origin of the world, one of the most extraordinarily detailed Gnostic cosmological texts ever recovered, describes them with surgical precision, were called the Archons, rulers, wardens, cosmic governors of human consciousness. And here is the one thing you must understand before we go into these verses. Archons don't want your body. They don't want your money. They want your attention permanently locked onto fear, guilt, and external authority, because a soul consumed by those 3 things will never look inward far enough to discover what it actually is. And the most genius part of this entire system? They don't need chains. They don't need surveillance. That's too obvious. Instead, they control you with something far more sophisticated. They control you with belief. Give a population a sacred text. Tell them it came directly from God. Tell them questioning it is sin. Tell them their eternal soul depends on obedience. And you have built the most sophisticated control system ever conceived. Now, let's open that text. And let's read it differently. But before we go in, if this kind of hidden knowledge is what you came here for, hit subscribe right now. Because what I'm about to show you goes far deeper than most channels will ever dare to touch. And if even one of these verses lands the way I think it will, your relationship with this book changes tonight. And the Lord God said, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." Did you catch that? Read it again, slowly. Like one of us, not like me, not the singular voice of one God. Us, a council, a group, multiple beings gathered together, and they are afraid of what a human being just became. Afraid that if that human being gains access to the next level of knowledge, something changes. Something tips out of their favor. And I want you to notice what that detail actually reveals. In every system of control ever built, whether it's a government, a corporation, or a cult, the first thing the controllers do is restrict access to information. Knowledge is always the first casualty. And right here, in the very 3rd chapter of the very first book, The text tells you that the divine authority governing your world felt threatened by a human who learned something new. Ask yourself, what kind of God fears an awakened human? This one stopped me completely the first time I saw it for what it really is. Humanity, in this story, was unified. One language, one purpose, one shared vision. And what were they building? A tower, reaching toward the heavens, reaching toward them. And this is the exact moment the text reveals something extraordinary. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." Stop. Read that first sentence again. Nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. That is not the language of a God protecting his children. That is the language of a ruler protecting his throne. A unified humanity was seen as a direct threat, not a blessing, not an achievement to celebrate, but a problem to be dismantled. And notice again, let us go down. That plural again. That council again. Throughout all of recorded history, every empire that ever wanted to maintain dominance over a population used the exact same strategy. Divide them by language, by tribe, by belief, by race. Keep them arguing with each other, so they never look up and ask who is pulling the strings. This verse isn't mythology. This verse is a policy document. I want you to think about the most corrupt government you can imagine. Think about every dictator, every war criminal, every leader who ever used power to crush the people beneath them. Now read this. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Every authority, established by God. This is the verse that was read from pulpits to justify slavery. This is the verse that kept peasants from revolting against kings who taxed them into starvation. This is the verse that told generations of suffering people that their suffering was divinely ordained, that resistance itself was an act against God. My personal opinion, this single verse has done more damage to human freedom than almost any political manifesto ever written. Because a political manifesto, you can debate it, reject it, burn it, but when obedience is framed as a spiritual requirement, you've just locked the cage from the inside. A supreme loving intelligence would never need you to submit to a corrupt earthly ruler on its behalf. Only a system designed to maintain hierarchical control would need that clause written into its sacred text. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the most powerful being in existence. A being that created galaxies, that designed consciousness itself, that exists beyond time and space. Now imagine that being getting jealous. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents, to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. Jealousy is a fear response. It is what happens when something you depend on for your self-worth feels threatened. It is one of the most psychologically immature emotions a human being can experience, and it is explicitly, openly, unapologetically attributed here to the God of the universe. But look past the jealousy for a moment, and look at the second part of that verse. Punishment doesn't just fall on you. It falls on your children, and their children, and their children's children. Generational punishment for the crime of not worshiping correctly. You know what that is in psychological terms? That is inherited trauma as a control mechanism. That is making entire bloodlines afraid of the consequences of stepping out of line. That is not divine love. That is a behavioral leash, passed down through generations, keeping entire family systems locked inside a framework of fear-based devotion. Let me tell you what is actually happening in this story, because most people read it their whole lives and miss it completely. There is a scene in heaven. God is sitting on his throne, and Satan walks in, not as an enemy, not as an intruder, but like someone who has a regular meeting scheduled. Calm, casual, expected. God looks at Satan and says, "Have you noticed my servant Job?" Now, Job is described in the Bible itself as a completely good man. Honest, faithful, devoted, the kind of person who did everything right. And God is the one who brings up his name. To Satan, Satan basically responds, "Job is only faithful because you protect him. Take everything away from him, and he will turn on you instantly." God says, "Fine, do whatever you want to him." Just like that, Job's entire life is handed over. He loses his children, his money, his health, everything gone. And Job had absolutely no idea this conversation ever took place. He just woke up one day and his world was destroyed. He never fought back, never questioned, just suffered quietly and called it God's will. And every church teaches this story as an example of beautiful faithfulness. But I have never been able to move past one thing. If God already knows everything, why did he need to test Job at all? The suffering was never the test. The suffering was the lesson. Stay quiet, endure, comply. I want to speak directly to you for a moment. Have you ever sat quietly, alone in nature, or in the middle of the night, and felt something? A presence, a knowing, something beyond words that felt more real than anything you'd been taught in a building with stained glass windows? Most people have, and most people dismiss it, because they've been told that direct access to the divine is not possible without going through the correct channel. Jesus answered, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Now, regardless of your beliefs about who Jesus was, look at what this verse does as a structural mechanism. It places a single gatekeeper between every human soul and the divine source. It tells you that your own inner experience, your own consciousness, your own direct spiritual knowing is not enough, is not valid, cannot be trusted. And here is something that almost nobody talks about. Jesus himself never came to build an institution. He never wrote a doctrine. He never established a church. Christianity, the system, the hierarchy, the gatekeeping, was built around him, not by him. The cage was constructed after he left. And suddenly you need the intermediary. Suddenly you cannot reach the divine without the priest, the pastor, the doctrine standing between you and it. Every system of control in history has inserted a middleman between the individual and the thing they most deeply need. Whether it's a government between a citizen and their rights, or a corporation between a worker and their livelihood, the middleman is always where the control lives. This verse built the middleman into the architecture of the soul itself. Before I give you this verse, I need you to think about something first. What is the single most dangerous thing you can take away from a person who is starting to question a control system? Not their money, not their freedom of movement, their community, their family, their sense of belonging. Because a human being who is completely isolated, who has been separated from everyone who might validate their doubts, will almost always crawl back to the system just to feel connected to something again. Now read this. "Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother." This is Jesus speaking, the Prince of Peace. And he is openly, explicitly describing the fracturing of the most fundamental human bonds, family. And for centuries, this is exactly what happened. People cut off parents who didn't convert. Communities shunned members who doubted. Families fractured along religious lines. And each isolated individual became more dependent on the religious institution as their only remaining source of belonging and identity. Isolation is not a side effect of this system. According to this verse, it was the intention. I'm going to give you this one with no build-up. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie. God sends the delusion, not the devil, not some external adversary. The God of the text, the one demanding your worship and obedience, is explicitly described here as the source of a mass deception sent to make people believe something false. I'll be honest, when I first really read this verse, I sat with it for a long time, because this is not a fringe interpretation. This is not me reading between the lines. This is the text, in plain language, describing a divine intelligence that deliberately programs false belief into human consciousness. The Gnostics had a specific name for this function of the Archons. They called it the veil, the layer of manufactured reality draped over human perception to prevent the soul from recognizing its own true nature. And here, right inside the canonical New Testament, that veil has a single undeniable author. I want you to approach this last one slowly, because this is not about shock. This is about something much more profound and much more disturbing. This is about what happens when a system successfully replaces a human being's own moral compass with unconditional obedience. In Numbers 31, Moses has just returned from a military campaign, and God gives the following instruction: "Now kill all the boys." and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. Billions of people have read this book, revered this book, called this book the living word of a loving God. And this is inside it. I'm not asking you to feel outrage. I'm asking you to feel something more important, clarity. Because the most sophisticated thing a control system can ever achieve is getting its followers to suspend their own innate moral judgment in deference to the system's authority. When you can read a command this explicit, attributed directly to God, and find a way to rationalize it, justify it, contextualize it into acceptability, your moral autonomy has been completely absorbed by the system. That is the final, deepest layer of control. Not fear, not isolation, not economic dependency, but the total replacement of your own conscience with the system's voice. Now step back, look at all 10 verses together. Knowledge suppressed, humanity divided, obedience to corrupt rulers demanded, jealousy and fear embedded into the image of God, suffering sanctified, spiritual access gatekept, families fractured, mass delusion sourced to God himself, and moral judgment surgically replaced with blind compliance. This is not a random collection of ancient writings. This is a system. Every single mechanism follows the same architecture: reduce human sovereignty, manufacture dependency, and sever every connection that might lead you back to your own inner authority. Elaine Pagels, professor of religion at Princeton University and one of the most respected scholars of early Christian history in the world, spent decades documenting how the Gnostic Gospels were systematically destroyed by the early church. Her research reveals that the texts which describe direct, personal divine connection, the ones that made institutional religion unnecessary, were the first ones labeled heretical and burned. Ask yourself why. What I genuinely believe after going deep into all of this. The question was never whether God exists. Something created this universe, something vast and incomprehensible and real. The question is far more specific, far more dangerous to the system. Who wrote the rules? And who do those rules serve? Because if you look at every rule in that system, every commandment, every law, every prophecy, and ask who benefits from my compliance with this, the answer is never you. And the Gnostics knew this. They encoded it into their hidden texts for exactly this moment. Seeing the cage is the first act of leaving it. You cannot free yourself from a system you cannot perceive. But the moment you perceive it, the moment something in you shifts and says, wait, who wrote this and why? Something in you has already stepped outside the walls. You didn't stumble onto this video by accident. You were already asking the question before you even clicked play. And if you made it this far, that question inside you isn't going anywhere. If anything, it just got louder. Good. Let it. Because what I showed you today is only the surface layer. 10 verses from one book. But what should genuinely unsettle you as you walk away from this video is this: the Archons didn't just write one book.